Hi, my name's Bhavini McCormick, Campaigns and Projects Manager at Thomas Parkinson Trust. Welcome to I Care and You webinar 24, where we'll be learning about being cautious and of trying to avoid scams and any fraudulent emails or social media that we may have. So today we are joined by Pete Holley from the Met Police, who will be sharing a presentation with us. And if I can invite you, Pete, to come on and introduce yourself and give us the information you have for us today.
Certainly. Thank you very much for having me. It's great to be presenting to you guys. So yeah, my name's Pete. I'm a officer from the Met Cybercrime Unit, and I'm part of the Protect team. And what we do is we give people advice and guidance on how to protect themselves from fraud, but not only fraud, but cybercrime as well. Because as we're going to go and talk about, it's a pretty big top problem, and the way that we solve this problem is by prevention. So giving people the tools and the ability to protect themselves from these crimes so that these incidents of crimes go down. So what we talk about today, we're going to be giving an overview of fraud, cryptocurrency and cybercrime. Hopefully by the end of this, we're going to increase our understanding of what kind of methods that criminals use to commit these kinds of crimes, improve the knowledge around the common offences. So what are the most common crime types that we see in fraud, and how do we change people's behavior in order to protect ourselves better from these kinds of offences, and obviously how to raise awareness about how to report these crimes if these crimes unfortunately happen. So those are the things we're going to be covering today in this presentation. So effectively, more people are concerned about fraud than other crimes in the UK, such as knife crime and burglary. So fraud makes up a massive proportion of crime. It makes up 41% of all crime, and the vast majority of this crime goes underreported, with 86% of it going unreported. Its financial impact is massive, and its impact on people's mental health and their well-being is also massive as well. 63% it was harmful to their mental health, and 39% it was affected their physical health as well. In addition to the sort of the human and emotional cost of fraud, we're also seeing an upscaling in fraud by criminals using things like AI to perpetuate frauds as well. So it's always been a developing field, and it will be so in the future. So with this little chart, effectively this shows pretty much all crime that's been reported in England and Wales. I think there was 100 million crimes that have been reported. So half of which are fraud and cybercrime. So it's a massive issue and it's a massive problem. And that's already on top of all the other crime that's been reported in England and Wales. So that's your thefts, your burglaries, your assaults, all the kind of violent, nasty crime that there is in the UK. Just as much happens online. And we say that there's fraud and there's cybercrime. So there's two types of crime. There's crime that's being used by committing a computer against another computer. So we're talking about hacking. But then we're also looking at cyber-enabled frauds. So, for instance, maybe romance fraud, for instance, or courier fraud, or via those means. So, but what does that mean for the ordinary member of the public? Well, it means that statistically, you're 20 times more likely to be defrauded at your computer than to be robbed in the street. Obviously, this is a very surprising statistic, but you are just likely to be a victim of crime, being at your computer, opening up emails, answering emails, and clicking links effectively than being a victim of crime in the street. We are moving towards that sort of place where we are actually being victims on our devices. And the way we get ahead of this is by, increasing our knowledge and, looking out for the signs that you can tell when you're being defrauded, for instance. So again, the wider impact, it's not just people's mental health, it's their self-confidence, it's their faith in financial institutions, their faith in the system, relationships get affected. So this is an opinion survey of fraud victims, and the vast majority of them reported something negative by their experience of experiencing fraud. Obviously, it's a crime, and crime is obviously detrimental in every respect. But the most common thing that's affected is self-confidence and mental health. So it is a massive thing that people are affected by. So one of the main methodologies that criminals like to use is the language of fraud. So a lot of times they like to trigger an emotional response from people. So that could be anger, fear, concern, fear of missing out, shame. And often they try to make people act on time pressure, basically making them to act on response, making them think that something the first is going to be happening and going to be providing only one solution. So they'll do this by requesting confidentiality or secrecy, appealing to people's sense of urgency, and trying to establish credibility and reference to trust. So basically, what that means is people should never think that people should never say that, oh, you've been tricked or you've been fooled. These criminals use a well-rehearsed methodology to try and trick people out of their money and to commit offences. So we have to be quite careful about the impact of language that we use. A lot of what strategies that fraudsters like to use, it's very, very similar to grooming. So I think a lot of people understand what grooming is in terms of, in terms of sexual offences, but it's building up friendship, trust, using flattery, making people feel like they're indebted to them. But basically what they're doing is they're trying to isolate people from their support network. And this obviously escalates over time. And people might feel heavily reliant on the people who are committing these frauds because they might feel like they're heavily reliant on them for financial support or emotional support. Um, and obviously these fraudsters affect people's home life, their health, and their employment as well. So whenever we say that people are being tricked or fooled, it doesn't necessarily help because they're not just doing superficial trickery. They're doing quite orchestrated, thought out, thorough campaigns against people. So we kind of need to adjust the way that we talk about fraud in order to get somewhere. So that's why we created a campaign. I say we created, the Home Office did, so it's called Stop Think Fraud. It's a new national campaign that's been developed against fraud, and basically the idea is to make it so that the message is out there that everyone can be deceived by fraud, no matter who they are, no matter what position they are in life, and realistically, where they are and where they came from, anyone can be a victim of fraud. Fraudsters aren't fussy; they will pick on anyone. You can find out more about this campaign if you go on gov.uk stop think fraud. You'll be able to find out a lot more about it. There's also going to be a lot of social media comms and campaigns that are going to be releasing soon as well. And you may have seen or heard of these advertisements on the radio because it's a massive push that the government is doing to try and really let people know about frauds and how they actually are committed. So talking about how they are committed, the main way that fraudsters enact their criminality is by using something called social engineering. Now, what social engineering is, it's called the clever manipulation of the natural human tendency to trust. So we're using people's trust against them in order to get a gain out of it or cause someone to be a loss, effectively. So, as I said, the natural manipulation of the natural human tendency to trust, and it's done by a variety of different means. So we'll go through some of these in turn. So we have spoofing, which is basically masquerading as something that you're not. So an idea that you can have with spoofing is fraudsters can spoof telephone numbers, for instance. So they could spoof a bank's telephone number to make it seem like they're actually phoning from the bank when really they're not. We have phishing, so fraudulent emails. So again, fraudsters creating emails that look exactly like the real thing from a legitimate company. So the graphics will be the same, the branding will be the same, the URL, the sort of email addresses will look very similar, but ultimately it will contain links that will lead to malware or other things where people input their information, and then that's where the fraud happens. And then we have smishing, which is pretty much the same as phishing, but fraudulent text messages, so it's via different means. Vishing, which is fraudulent telephone calls. So typically here we're talking about cold callers and other things of that ilk. They can be actually very, very rehearsed. Fraudsters will actually look up a lot about people online, what information they have out in the public. If people on the open register, for instance, or people what they know from social media. Less common, but what we're seeing a little bit more of now is called quishing, which is fraudulent QR codes. So if you go to a restaurant, for instance, you might see QR codes, you scan them for the menu, for instance. That's the most common thing that you see out in the world. But sometimes we're seeing more that emails are containing QR codes as well. So they're sort of obscuring the details of the link with a sort of graphical pattern that you scan that will take you to that link. So they're adding another layer of complexity, and they're adding another layer to deceive people into the nature of the links that people click online. So as I say, 90% of fraud and cybercrime, for cybercrime at the very least, happens by clicking a malicious link or downloading an attachment. Now, if you click a malicious link, what could happen is you get sent to a portal or a form that may look exactly like the legitimate company, it may look exactly like the real thing, but it's in the control of the fraudsters, and effectively they can just collect data from there. Also, attachments can contain malware as well. So if you open an attachment, some malware can be downloaded onto your device, and then obviously that can lead you to be a victim of fraud as well. So if you basically receive any communication that's not expected, treat it with a heavy dose of suspicion. Don't click on any links and don't open any attachments if you're in any doubt whatsoever. So obviously, I understand, using especially this detecting a phishing email is very difficult, especially even if you are a person that uses assistive technology. So the way we can sort of help with this is that make sure that you have screen readers and accessibility tools that are turned on, and you can actually set it to read the full email addresses for senders, and particularly domain names, because the main thing that you need to be looking out for is the what is basically put at after the at. So a lot of times fraudsters will basically, let's say if I wanted to impersonate Amazon.com, the domain for Amazon.com is already taken. So what I need to do is I need to replace the O with a character that looks very much like an O, but it isn't an O. And this can happen by using different characters from different languages, like a Cyrillic alphabet, for instance. So a screen reader should be able to pick up the difference in the way that word is pronounced, or that word Amazon is pronounced. So that's one way that we can use to detect whether it's a malicious link or not. You can look at company domain names. Do they actually match up to what is out there? You can look up on a separate search, what is it supposed to look like? What is it supposed to be presented? Obviously be very aware of people trying to impersonate companies from free email addresses. So what we're saying, a free email address, so things like Google Mail, Proton Mail, for instance, those are quite red flags. Obviously, ensure the spelling is correct. And you can also use stuff like assistive technology, like Google Assistant or Cortana, or any other kind of assistive technology to look up the company's information via a third party, effectively. So what we like to teach people is if you get sent an email that's purporting to be from a company, never click on any of the links that are in that email. Look up on Google, look them up separately, and get that information from there. Never call any numbers that they're put in that text message or email. Always go outside of that to check whether that company is legitimate or not. So obviously, the way a lot of fraudsters like to trick people is they'll use information that they glean from social media against them. So we're finding this a lot, that fraudsters are actually taking their time and they're actually reviewing people with a lot more specifically. So be aware of who you follow and who's your friend on social media. Information can be used to pretend to be you or come off phishing emails, or to make sure to see that you're not at home, for instance. We've seen people post on social media to say that they're going to go on holiday for 2 weeks. And obviously, burglars have Twitter or X too. They look at the social media, they say, oh, I know that house. They're going away for 2 weeks. They'll come round, and we've had it where people burgled the place. So be careful what you post on social media, because it can be used against you. The best way that I can give advice around this is, if you use social media, look at your privacy settings and look at what you post as well. Look at what's visible and think to yourself, is this something that I would feel comfortable with just shouting out in the street or just saying to some random person? And if it's not, I would suggest maybe you can change privacy settings to block down the information that's important to you. But also make sure your friends and family members do the same, because ultimately the fraudsters can just go to your family members to get to you effectively. They can follow you that route. No matter who someone claims they are, they can always be a fraudster. So criminals pretend to be anyone. They can pretend to be police officers, pretend to be friends, even pretend to be family members. We've seen a quite malicious "Hey Mum" scam. So people take over, like a fraudster takes over someone's phone, and effectively they just lie and pretend to be a family member, but they're actually a criminal. So they'll say, "Hey Mum, I'm trapped on a motorway. I need you to send me like £500 urgently. So, it sounds quite difficult, but, never trust anything on face value, because criminals can ultimately pretend to be anyone. Um, Never give out any information like PIN codes or passwords to anyone, because you shouldn't really have any need or requirement to do so. There's no real need to give over your passwords or PIN codes to anyone. Um, Especially the way that you can counter the "Hey Mum" sort of scam scenario is that with your loved ones, almost sort of create a rehearsed like code word that you say to each other. So if that emergency does happen, you can ask them a question and you know what the response is because you've already programmed that response. So, and if they don't give that response, then it's a high likelihood that that person is a scammer. So let's say I arrange with my mum, look, if I'm really in trouble, you ask me how my dog is doing, and then I respond, yeah, he's doing well. He just needs to be put back in the kennel. For instance, that could be one of the things you could basically use. Okay. And then obviously, if someone pretends to be me or takes over my phone, and I say that I'm in an emergency situation, then I can give that response to that question. You can report smisses and smishes online. So you can report them at phishing.gov.uk, and you can forward text to 7726, which spells spam on your keyboard. And you can report all of the fraud and cybercrime to action fraud. So the link is up there. We're also giving you out some handouts at the end of this as well, and some links. So I'm not necessarily going to try too much on malware and vulnerabilities, but malware is quite simply a software that's been designed for a nefarious purpose. Um, they've got all different names. There's all different types like adware, spyware, and ransomware. But ultimately, all of these things can do harm to your computer. And the best way to protect against these vulnerabilities and these malicious software is to make sure that your software is always updated. It's got the latest patch. Always update your devices when prompted. And you can set devices to update automatically as well, even your mobile devices. Um, Make sure that you have antivirus and make sure that it's set up on all your devices that you can set it to run a full scan and get it to check for new files as well, because the only way that that antivirus can help you is if the antivirus definitions are updated. If they're not up to date, then that's how viruses can slip in. And then finally, back up your data. We're seeing more and more, not even just within acts of criminals, when people get their phone stolen or disaster, like someone drops their phone, for instance, a lot of information is lost forever because people don't back up their devices. So what we recommend is backup data that's important to you. I can't tell you what's important in your lives, but stuff like financial documents, family photos, things that you think, oh, it might be an actual pickle if I lost this. We recommend backing up into more than 3 places. So you can have one in your PC, for instance, one on a USB drive at home, or one in a cloud server or on a cloud account somewhere. And that will give you some redundancy as well. So if the worst was to happen, you can easily recover that information. So moving on to sort of data breaches. So more and more we're seeing companies that are being breached online. So a data breach happens when information is stolen or taken from a system or the knowledge owner without their authority. And we're seeing more and more that places like Facebook, NHS, BA, all these big companies, they're all suffering data breaches. And when they do suffer data breaches, a lot of information is leaked out. And what is leaked out most commonly are passwords and email addresses. So when that happens, we need to try and secure our online accounts as best we can, because having a simplistic password unfortunately does us a detriment. Yes, they are very easy to remember, but we're actually not doing ourselves any favors, because 9 times out of 10, if you think your password is unique, it probably isn't. And criminals know this and they exploit this to the fullest. So just give you an example. Let's say if we had a simplistic looking password called grinning123, let's say if criminals hacked a database or like a company, and they know all of this stuff is out online, it would take them the 3.6 seconds to crack. So not really long at all. But if you notice, that's kind of similar to what companies will ask you to create a password with. It's not very good. So adding in some capitalizations and symbols, you'd think that would be better. Unfortunately, it's not, because it's only 11.5 minutes different, so not really much in it. So the main benefit of having a secure password is when we introduce more characters. So as soon as we introduce more characters, our password gets more stronger. So that takes an hour to crack on average if we were to brute force that password. So let's take it up a level. So let's use 3 random words to generate our password. So 3 random words that have no connection with each other, that only we know and that only we can generate. Okay, so let's try getting skydiving otters. So our Winston is it will go our password is going up. Our security for our password is going up because there's more characters. But it's going to be more than an hour. It's going to be more than a year. It's 24 years that password takes to crack. So already we're seeing the longer the longer is truly stronger. The more characters you have in your password, the better. But we can make it even more stronger by adding some numbers and symbols. So let's try grinning skydiving otter pound 33. Now this it really is exponential. So that will take 20 million years to crack. If we just used like a database cracking tool or like a brute force tool. So really the benefit is having a long, strong password that only you can remember. So again, don't reuse passwords. Use a strong and separate password for your email address, because your email address is what you're going to be used to recovering your accounts if they are unfortunately compromised. You can use a password manager as well. So password manager is a separate piece of software that can use to save passwords for you, so you don't have to remember it. You can use assistive software. You can save passwords in your browser if you so wish to. That is perfectly acceptable as well. But just make sure that mobile device, or just make sure that PC that you're accessing your browser on, is quite password secure. And you can password protect your mobile devices as well, because that's what is going to activate that encryption on that device and protect that data. If you want to find out if any of your details have been published online as a part of a data breach, you can go on this website called howivebenpwned.com. It was created by Troy Hunt, who is a former Microsoft engineer, and basically he's created a database of all known data breaches. So all you need to do, go on this website and input your email address. It's perfectly safe. We recommend it all the time. And you click pwned, and which is basically search, another way of saying on the website, and it will give you a detailed breakdown of how many times your data has been found on a breach site. So you can then use that information to better change your passwords. And if you have any data that's shown on that particular website, don't worry. All you need to do is change your password. But you can change your password using 3 random words with numbers and symbols. Just make sure it's not personal to you, and just make sure that you're using something that you can remember as well. And also what can help you is by using two-step verification. So two-step verification is something else that you have in addition to your password. So if I enter my password, I then need something else to get into that account. So I either need my fingerprint, or I need a 2FA code, or I need or something that's sent to a text message that's sent to my phone. These aren't 2FA isn't like a magic bullet. It's not perfect, but it is immensely strong, and it does improve your security by a great leap and bound. So we encourage people to install 2FA on as many accounts as they possibly can. So we talked about some of the cyber elements, but now we're going to go through fraud and some other common offences. So we talked about the cyber element now, and now we're more talking about the non-cyber element, almost the most common frauds that we see. So more commonly, we've seen romance fraud. So romance fraud disproportionately affects people who already may be quite vulnerable. So these fraudsters really do take their time. They go to great lengths to gain their victims' trust. They try to convince people that they're in a genuine relationship, and they try to manipulate them financially over time. Try to use the language that we talked about earlier to manipulate and persuade people and exploit them to try and get them to give money, but not to the extent that it would arouse suspicion. And obviously, these crimes are very emotive and they're highly damaging to people's mental and emotional health as well. Within the last year, there have been 1,103 reports of romance fraud within the MPS area, and that average loss is £12,000, £12,691. So already that impact is huge, and that's even just the financial impact, not just the emotional impact alone. So obviously there are some things you can sort of look out for with the common features of romance fraud. So Amazon's of red flags. So, when we say that, everyone's a human being, everyone has flaws. If this person is absolutely perfect and you think they're perfect in every way, shape, or form, they don't do anything wrong and don't put a foot wrong, that may be a cause for concern. Obviously, people who are trying to commit romance fraud, they build a relationship over time in an expected way. They'll move off dating websites and go into encrypted applications. But that quite happens commonly in dating anyway. But then they'll ask you for more finance related things. So they'll have disguised requests for money. They won't ask for this directly, but sometimes they'll um, often decline money if you present it to them. So they're building that trust. They're trying to build that rapport with people. They encourage secrecy, so they'll cut you off eventually cutting off from support networks, making people feel like they're being disloyal for seeking help or seeking help from other people other than the actual fraudster. And a lot of times, what they do is they use similar tactics to grooming that we find in grooming and domestic abuse. So, building trust and confidence, bombarding people with gifts and affection, encouraging secrecy, and ultimately isolating people from support and making them feel guilty for questioning them effectively. So, it's a really manipulative type of fraud. So, we can always be aware of those signs as well. So be aware about revealing personal information about yourself online. Remain on dating sites, messaging platform if the contact was via dating site, because ultimately dating websites do have a duty of care to protect people. And as soon as you move into a encrypted application, it's a lot more difficult for us to sort of do to track people. Whereas if it's kept on a dating website, they do record the messages and they can give over the messages to police if there's a justification or a need to. Um, be wary if you're encouraged to keep things from family and friends because they don't want people to talk to you. They want to isolate people. And be aware of anyone asking lots of questions about you, but not really feeling much about themselves, because fraudsters want you to talk about yourself. They want you to feel like you're basically the only person in their world, and they will do so to try and make you believe that they are pretty much the one when ultimately they're not. They want you to believe that this illusion almost. So we in way that we can help this is by saying stop, challenge, protect. So stop, take a moment and think before parting with money or information that could keep you safe. If they're asking very, very personal things very, very early on, or that might be out of character, you not feel comfortable with it, don't engage with it. Challenge whether it could be fake. It's okay to check or ignore any requests. Only criminals will try to rush and panic you. And obviously, you can contact your bank immediately if you think you've been falling victim to a scam. Ultimately, never send any money, never allow them access to your bank account, never allow them to transfer money on your behalf, never take out a loan for them, never provide copies of your personal documents because no one should ever have any access to that really anyway. Not in a legitimate relationship anyway. Some maybe, yeah. So never invest in your own money on their behalf. Uh, Never purchase or send codes from gift cards at Amazon, and never agree to receive, or send any goods on their behalf, so especially mobile phones or laptops, because what we see in the past is fraudsters are actually getting other people, their victims, to send them items that they use to commit further frauds for other people, because they're getting the victim to buy this stuff. The audit trail goes back to them, not to the fraudster. So just be aware of all of those things as well. So investment frauds, it's quite common. So again, we're talking about pyramid schemes, share schemes, frauds that are pretty much like too good to be true. We've seen a lot of big spike in fraud offences in this area, because obviously times are hard, cost of living crisis, people want to I'd say get rich quick, but they definitely want to be able to try and get more money out of people. And they definitely want to be sort of progress those opportunities, especially with cryptocurrency, stock exchanges, and all modern inventions and sort of investments that happen. So obviously, with investment fraud, there's a lot of presence of deep fakes, so AI generated deep fakes and imaging pretending to be celebrities. Um, People who propose to be experts, they actually run fraudulent companies, so they create fraudulent companies that are fronts. Websites maybe appear to be legitimate and have a high quality, but to build confidence. Effectively, there's a lot of information here, but ultimately, if it's too good to be true, more than likely that it probably is. If they're asking you to talk about it more, or they want you to invest in it more, or contribute money to it very, very quickly, or if it's a gain that's very, very quick, or a promising game that's very, very quick, treat it with a hefty dose of suspicion. They might ask you to install software to sort of discuss the thing further. They might ask you to open accounts on their behalf. Never do this, because doing so might actually be laundering money on their behalf. So just be very, very careful and just look out for those warning signs. So obviously, no one should ever rush you into making an investment. Carry out your own research, seek advice by speaking with friends and family, or even professional independent advisors. You can go on the Financial Conduct Authority website as well. They have some good resources for that as well. You can use the FCA's Smart Scam Smart register to check if a company is regulated by them, because anyone offering any financial services has to be regulated by the Financial Conduct Authority. If they're not on that risk list, it's a high likelihood that it's a scam. There's no such thing as a guaranteed profit. There's risk inherent in everything, even in investments. And don't invest more than you're prepared to lose. And set investment limits as well. And as I say, fraudsters will try and get to you via other means to make sure your device is updated and make sure that you've got antivirus installed. And again, if it sounds too good to be true, it probably is. Probably one of the most damaging kind of fraud is courier fraud. So this when a criminal contacts a victim by telephone, pretend to be a figure of authority or a bank official or a police officer. They'll say, "Oh, we need your help in assisting investigation. We need you to go and withdraw this amount of money," and then a courier will come and pick up that money a bit later, and because this needs to be transferred elsewhere. So it's quite insipid version of fraud. It's very, very damaging. Because ultimately people are coming to someone's house and they're trying to defraud, and they're pretending to be positions of authority as well. And they attack and target elderly people and quite vulnerable people in society as well. And it can be extremely damaging, this kind of fraud. So again, as I said in my earlier slide, criminals will pretend to be anyone. They'll pretend to be police, they'll pretend to be figures of authority. They'll often get you to try and withdraw cash either under duress or threats. So they say, look, if you don't cooperate with this, we'll seize your assets, or if you don't cooperate with us, we'll arrest you. The police or HMRC or any public body would never ask you to do anything like that. They would never ask you to withdraw your own money, and they would never threaten you with arrest in that regard, especially for that. They'll often try to get people to put some reference number or password to make it seem more official, and to make them believe that the victim's actually doing something that's a legitimate or official purpose. And obviously they'll try and arrange taxis and transportation. So they're trying to make this victim believe that they're actually assisting an investigation or a legitimate thing. They'll book taxis for them. They'll do all of these things to make them believe what they're doing is legitimate when actually they're just giving over money to criminals. So the actual average age for this courier fraud is 78. So again, it really does disproportionately target people who are over that age bracket. So if anyone comes up to you or messages you or basically does anything that sounds like courier fraud, hang up. If they ask you for any PIN codes or bank codes, police and the banks will never do this. Call back on a different line in 5 minutes to make sure that they're a real organization, so you can do so by checking third party. So don't go by the details that they tell you. Go separately. Speak to your friends and family before carrying out any actions. Don't give your cards, jewelry, or PIN numbers or cash to other people, no matter what they say. If they say it's a legitimate purpose, it probably isn't, because that's not how the police or banks work. You can consider the installation of call blockers as well. They can be particularly helpful. And as I say, never hand over your bank cards or make unexpected purchases following an unexpected call or visit, and never share your PIN code for anyone. Bit of advice as well: if you dial 159, it's a national system where if you dial 159 on your phone, you will actually get through to a bank switchboard. You can tell them what your bank is, and they'll put you through to the fraud department with that particular bank. So in that heat of that moment, you don't need to remember what your bank is or how you need to contact them. All you need to do, close the door, disconnect from them, and then call 159, and you can speak to your bank directly, and they'll help you do that. So again, we've already kind of spoke about phishing anyway, and we spoke about some of the things that you can do to prevent that. Another kind of common fraud that we see is online shopping fraud. So criminals post things for sale that appear legitimate that are highly discounted. So a price that isn't is even very generous for what is there already. A lot of these items don't exist or aren't the worth the advertised value. And criminals will sometimes ask potential buyer to move away from legitimate websites, so they either get people to pay via Bitcoin or other less established website as well to complete a transaction. So online shopping fraud is very common when over winter time or holidays when people have birthdays and Christmas and etc. So best advice we have for that is choose where you shop, stay on legitimate websites, use your credit card if you can, because credit cards are protected by the bank, because obviously you're using the bank's money to pay for things, not your own money. If something is too big to be true, it probably is, and obviously be aware that the buyer may be providing a different address to send the item to, and never agree to pay a third party as well. So I said earlier that criminals are using AI. We're seeing this quite a lot, especially with politicians and celebrities being deep faked. So an AI is effectively creating an image of someone else. Criminals have also been found using voice recording technology to record the voices of people, so they can actually impersonate people. So we've actually played around with some of this software in the office, and it takes about a 30-second sample of someone speaking to generate a voice clone of them. And this voice clone can be used to say pretty much anything that the AI tool will let you say, basically. So this has a potential to be very, very big, but ultimately all the same rules and all the same indications of a phishing email or of a scam are still present in it. If something is too good to be true, then it's too good to be true. They'll still use the same hooks, they'll still use the same details, they'll still use the same tactics effectively, but they're just going to be using AI to do it. And they can use this by a variety of different means. They can create images that aren't real, they can create images of people that aren't real, create voices that aren't real, and they can use stuff like Bing Image Creator to create images that aren't real as well. So obviously this creates a lot of concerns, especially for visually impaired people. So sometimes screen reading software is not accurately reading contents and not recognizing mistakes in email domains. Sometimes email addresses sounding similar when read out by screen readers. And sometimes there's an assumption that you have to log in a specific way because you're using assistive technology. And all of these things don't necessarily assist people who are visually impaired. And obviously, if you are visually impaired, it's a lot more difficult to recognize poorly designed quality of material. So obviously, if you can't read or see very well, it may be very difficult to distinguish whether a branding is off, for instance, or if the design of a logo is how it actually is. But obviously, every individual situation is unique. But obviously, those are the challenges that we face in this particular field as well. So what we can do to protect ourselves against that is ensure that screen readers are turned on and they're able to read the things properly. Screen readers are used to ensure the information can't be heard by those around you. And you can use Google assisted technology to look up company information via Google or Apple or like a third party source that's not being shown in that phishing email, for instance. Again, no one should be coming around your house in advance, and anyone who offers to visit you to discuss something, always decline, because they will try to use that to pressure you. If an individual's identity can't be confirmed, then ask them to wait until you call the company to confirm. They shouldn't have any problem with this. If they do have a problem with it, they are most definitely fraudsters because they want to put pressure on you and they want to trick you. And you can obviously set up a system that checks if someone else handles your finances, so multiple family members or a financial professional if you so need. If in doubt, you can call senders to make sure that the request is genuine. Obviously, try and use fingerprints or other methods other than passwords. You can use Google Pay and Apple Pay for paying things instead of entering PIN numbers. So if you don't want to enter PIN numbers, you could do so. And obviously, if you feel like you need to contact your bank, the easiest way to do it, remember, is call 159 on your keypad, and that will take you straight to your bank, and that will give you a selection of banks to choose from, and you can contact the fraud department for the banks directly. So if you want any further advice and guidance, you can do so by visiting these resources. So you can go on to actionfraud.police.uk. You can give them a phone call via 0300 123 2040, or if you're deaf or hard of hearing, you can use the text phone, which is 0300 123 2050. You can forward suspicious emails to report@phishing.gov.uk, and obviously you can report phishing messages via Ofcom as well. And you can contact the police obviously by 999 if it's an emergency. So if someone is, for instance, coming to your house and they're asking you to assist an investigation by handing over money or by trying to ask you for money in that regard, I would say that is an emergency, because the police will turn up to that, because that the actual crime is happening and the fraudster is on scene. So that I would say that would be 999. And obviously there is 101 for non-emergency numbers, but in an emergency, always divert to 999. No one will think you're wasting anyone's time by doing so. If you believe it's an emergency, then it's an emergency. So what you can do to help, so you can spread around what I've just told about today, because ultimately the more people know about this sort of knowledge, the better, because more people protect against it. There are some initiatives that you can have. So becoming a fraud, Friends Against Scams, through your local trading standards departments. And ultimately, there's a lot of things you can do to try and help spread this message around and help protect people. And what we like to say is tell two people, because those two people will tell four, and then six, and then eight, and etc. So if you want a little bit further advice, we'll send you out a link to our little media series. So it's a collection of books and videos that explains the most common fraud types. So you can go back through it in your own time and have a read of it. All these publications are accessibility tested. We have an audiobook version for our little book of big scams. So that's common frauds. But also we have BSL language videos as well, and obviously descriptive videos as well, for people who are visually impaired as well. So there's a plethora of information on that website should you choose to go over and have a look. But that will be the route for further advice and guidance in that regard. That has been my presentation about fraud. I apologize for maybe overrunning slightly. I do apologize for that. But yes, thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Pete, and thank you for all the information and making us aware about the possible scams and fraudsters out there that could take place, so we can do our due diligence. And of course, we'll share the recording to this webinar once it's available in a week or so, so we can share that with our friends and family. But also, when you get a moment, if you can forward that link over to audiobooks and all the other information, we will definitely share it out with everyone who's joined us today. There was lots of information, resources, website and telephone numbers shared. Don't worry if you didn't manage to get it down, because we will share that with the recording link. So once again, thank you, Pete. Before we move on to Q&A, if anyone has any questions for Pete, just letting everyone know that our next I Care and You webinar will take place on Tuesday, the 11th of June. And that will be all about UV lighting, how to protect your eyes against UV rays, what type of sunglasses, what kind of tint, shades, shapes, everything you need to know about protecting your eyes against UV lighting, especially for specific eye conditions as well. So again, that's on the 11th of June at the same time between 7 and 8, and we will share details of that as well.